So a few weeks ago, I finished The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, and it was simultaneously both not what I expected and exactly what I expected. And when I finished the book, what caught me even more off guard was when I realized how big the time scale might end up being. My personal rating was 4 out of 5 stars. While I did enjoy it a lot, and a lot more than I expected to when I started the book, there were definitely some things that I wasn't the biggest fan of. As usual with my spoiler-free reviews, let's start out with a spoiler-free synopsis of this book. This book follows two main perspectives, and I use quotation marks around the word perspectives because I mean, we'll talk about it later. The POVs are two dudes named Kunigaru and Mata Zindu. Kunigaru is a man of humble origins. In his late teens and early adult years, my dog is essentially like a gangster, but shit happens and he gets it together for a baddie. Mata Zindu is the grandson of one of the most famous generals in Kokuru, a state within the nations of Dara that were united under the tyrannical rule of one emperor, Mappadere. After Mappadere killed his family, Mata Zindu and his uncle alone survived. Kunigaru and Mata Zindu will find themselves fighting the empire, sometimes on the same side and sometimes on the opposite side. The tale of two brothers from different mothers and fathers. A tale of their relationship with others and what leading a revolution means. Their ideals will be tested. Their friendship will be tested. What happens when they find each other on opposite sides of their war? Now, to start off as usual, let's go over what I did like about this book. I really enjoyed the scale of it. I love giant epic fantasies. You really get politics, action, and scenes from like a plethora of nations. Shit is wild. I'll throw a map up. You see everything here? You visit like every single one of these places in this one book. Freaking insane. Honestly, you could say that Ken Liu might have stuffed too much shit in one singular novel. This might not be for everybody, but I like those types of books where I have to keep referring back to the map to understand what the hell's going on. Next thing I really loved was the politics. Once again, the vastness of it is really cool to see. I really like seeing the motivations of the rulers, the motivations of the pieces on the chessboard, if you will. The other thing I really liked was the political maneuverings of the gods and the motivations of the gods. This entire book of humans fighting humans was basically a giant game to the gods, and it was really interesting seeing which god was on which side, who teamed up, things like that, and what happened when they lost. I really liked watching their subtle interferences with our characters to push them to make decisions that the gods wanted. So the god political maneuvering was also really interesting. The biggest thing about this book that I liked was our characters, for sure, 1000%. I actually thought they were awesome. If I didn't like them as much as they did, I probably would have knocked this down to a 3 stars, and we'll talk about why that is a little bit later. Let's start off with our two main characters, Kunigaru and Mata Zindu. This is a spoiler-free review, so I won't go into like super specifics, but Kunigaru, like I said, is a man of humble origins, is a man who everybody really disregarded as a future failure. He was the type of dude who did what he wanted when he wanted, and often this involved like pissing everybody off, but he always like had a kind heart, you know what I mean? Even when he did less than desirable things. Kunigaru was definitely my favorite character because I love how kind and smart he is, whilst hiding it behind a shaggy exterior and maybe like a little too laid back attitude. Every bad thing he has done with a sort of, I don't know if honor is the word, maybe reasonable motivation without ever true hostile or evil intent. But as you see him grow into a role as a leader and deal with others whose minds don't work the same way that his does, you can see his morals get tested. And he even has to bend and do some dirty things in order to come out on top. He's no stranger to doing dirty things, but you can tell that some of the shit he has to do is too far even for him. And so watching that internal conflict with him is very interesting to see, and something that I really, really loved about this book. I really like seeing the decisions that a man even as good as Kunigaru had to be pushed to make. This isn't really a corruption story, so you don't have to really worry about that, but I really enjoyed watching his growth and his change as a character, and I also think he's really funny in his shaggy personality and really makes him like relatable to men. I wanted to highlight him specifically because he was my favorite character. As for the rest of the cast, everybody was honestly really fantastic, and honestly, for reasons I'll get into later, I feel like they shouldn't have been as fantastic as they were. It doesn't really make sense to me. The deuteragonist, Mata Zindu, was honestly the perfect Sasuke for our Naruto Kunigaru brothers, but they just don't see the world and how it should be the same. This cast of characters is really filled with a huge amount of depth and many layers to unfold, and I was shocked by that. I also really loved the women characters in this book. At first, I was getting like a little misogyny vibes from the author, but as the book goes on, that was dispelled pretty decently, and I understood what he was trying to do. I like the diversity of the roles the women characters have in this book, and I think Ken Liu definitely ends up highlighting the strength of the feminine, and that strong women roles are in whatever the woman chooses to be, whether it be a wife, mother, soldier, queen. As long as they make that choice, that is a strong role for the woman to be in. The last thing I want to very briefly talk about is the plot. It was honestly just kind of okay and very predictable, especially if you read the back of the book, but I'm saying I liked it because the characters themselves made me emotionally attached to it. This is a perfect example of amazing characters carrying a mediocre plot. Something I talked about when it comes to other books I've reviewed on this channel, like The Will of the Many by James Islington and The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. Those books try to do the opposite, have an awesome external plot, but the characters are kind of just meh, especially the main characters, which in my opinion doesn't work. Luckily, that was not the case for this book. It was the opposite. Okay, now on to things that I wasn't the biggest fan of. But first, if you're liking this, make sure you like, subscribe, and tell me what your thoughts are. If you have read this book, if you haven't, tell me your thoughts on this video, and if you think you will enjoy this book at the very end. Also, check out my socials down below, along with my wish list / sponsor links. Okay, things I didn't like. First, this book felt like an abridged version of a duology or trilogy. This book is very, very fast paced. It is very clear that this book is a prologue, but it could have easily been its own series. That's how much shit is stuffed into this book. The events happen quickly. The time jumps are spacey. I am curious to see what the next book will bring and if it will be similar structure wise. This series is called the Dandelion Dynasty, so I'm thinking that maybe this will follow like a family lineage, maybe based off of the actions of this book. We'll find out when we read the next one. I don't know. Next, I really was not a big fan of how this book reads. It reads very much like a mix between a history textbook and the Bible. Third person perspective doesn't even properly convey how this book is written. It's more like super omniscient fourth person perspective. Most of the time, it doesn't really feel like you're with the characters, but just watching them from above. And like I said earlier, I somehow still found myself being really attached and really loving the characters of this book, but it was mostly just by being told about them. I wasn't really in them. I didn't feel in the room with them, in their presence. It still somehow worked out, and I have no idea how. I cannot fathom how this is possible and how Ken Liu achieved this. It's impressive. It really is, at least for me. Like, to me, he accomplished something that on paper should not work, but it did. I still would have vastly preferred a more regular third person perspective vibe that I'm more used to, but you know, kudos to him for pulling it off. I can't believe he did it. This kind of leads me into one other thing that I didn't really like, and it is the POV switching in the middle of pages without text breaks. If y'all haven't watched my video of the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, y'all know I laid into him for doing this, and while I wasn't the biggest fan of it in The Grace of Kings either, not by a long shot, it was definitely far better executed here. And I think I'm attributing this success, quote unquote, to what I was calling the super omniscient fourth person perspective. Because you were like so removed from the characters in terms of the way it was written, to me this let it work out a lot better than Dan Brown's book, where you were more in there with the characters, feeling them with them. I guess if you're gonna do it, then make sure your reader is like freaking watching this whole thing happen from an eagle's point of view, I guess. I don't know. I still didn't like it though, you know, obviously, but it was tolerable, way more tolerable than Dan Brown. Going back to the whole textbook and Bible thing, history textbook and Bible thing, you can probably guess what I'm saying. There is lore dumps and history dumps galore, especially in the first half of the book. Sometimes it feels like they last whole ass chapters. They actually might. I can't really remember, but I think they do actually. It was nuts. If I didn't have the audiobook to immersion read this first half of the book would have taken a lot longer than the week I read it in. If you don't have an audiobook version, I highly recommend you snag one. I got mine from the library. Or if you can't handle a lot of history and lore dumps, this book might not be for you. For me personally, as long as I have an audiobook along with the physical, then it's fine for me. So just be warned. This book was easily the most unique fantasy I've ever read, not necessarily in terms of its plot, setting, or even characters, but the way this book is structured and the way this book reads will definitely stay with me for a long time. I didn't think I would go outside of my comfort zone while reading this, but I did. And I'm glad I did, because at the end of the day, I did enjoy my time, and I was up to like 4 a.m. binging the last 200 pages of it. I definitely recommend you give this guy a try. I can fully acknowledge that this book is not for everybody, and that's okay, but I still think it's worth the attempt. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, sub, comment, and check out my socials in the description down below. I'll see you next time.